a lot of my clients say, oh, I hate that I'm so sensitive. It's like, there's nothing wrong with being sensitive. Being sensitive is a gift, but it comes with vulnerability that we do need to recognize and manage. Otherwise, we will instinctively retract and recoil from every possible scenario where it might be triggered. And that is going to prevent you from ever sharing anything valuable with even a single other person. I don't want to date. Someone might reject me. I don't want to start a podcast. Nobody might listen. I don't want to write a book. Who would read it? Well, you may have noticed, as I have, that there's a lot of people putting stuff out there that isn't that good. So I'm thinking, hang on a minute. You don't even have to be that smart, that talented, that brilliant to put your work out there. What the hell? How do these people manage to do it? How do people who, frankly, in my opinion, at least, put out mediocre work, how do they do that? Either don't know they're mediocre or they have managed to master dealing with rejection in a way that I haven't yet. So that's where we go.
ADHD Rewired, episode 372. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter, you can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Diann Wingert. Diann is a former psychotherapist turned mindset and productivity coach for female entrepreneurs with ADHD traits, officially diagnosed or not. Her mission is to mentor women who are driven but distracted to overcome limiting beliefs and disempowering habits to create an ADHD-friendly business and lifestyle. Diann's website is Diann Wingert Coaching. It's DIANNWINGERT coaching.com. And her podcast, The Driven Woman, can be found on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, all the other places where you get your podcasts. Diann, welcome to ADHD Rewired. Welcome back, I should say.
Yes.
Right? You were on when?
I think it was like, I don't know, 76 or 49 or.
It was a long
3 years ago, I think.
Time ago.
Yeah. Right? Oh, you're not going to sing, are you? Come on.
Well, if I do, will you follow suit?
I'll have to sing along. Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
So the karaoke episode. All right. So I'm really excited about this conversation because there's been a lot of sort of buzz in the ADHD space on RSD, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria.
Big time.
And you do a lot of work, as do I, with entrepreneurs. And part of what you're looking at is the connection between these two. So I want to kind of dive into that. And I know one of the things you also talk about too is not necessarily RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, but just rejection sensitivity. Let's just start there. Why do you sort of parse those things out?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Eric. By the time you find out you have ADHD, especially if you're a woman, more often than not, you are already well into adult life. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or in my case, even beyond, by the time you get the official diagnosis. And sometimes it's a relief. Sometimes it's initiating you into a whole period of grief. But one thing is for sure, you've got to come to terms with what those 4 little letters mean to you and about you. Attention, deficit, hyperactivity, disorder. At least 2 of them are really lame and defensive and stigmatizing. So when I first started hearing about RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, I thought, oh, please, the last thing we need is 3 more letters, right? I know that it's a part of ADHD for most of us, or at least for many of us, but it's not an independent diagnosis of its own. And so I personally don't encourage people to start saying, I have ADHD and I have OCD and I have RSD because that is a mindset that is fundamentally limiting, even if it's true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I know it is one of the, I hear all these people who are trying to kind of rebrand ADHD. And maybe I'm in the minority on this. I kind of just don't give a shit. It is what it is. Like, it's ADHD. Like, it's attention deficit hyper. Is it the best name for it? No way. Like, there could be way better names, but this sort of mission that a lot of people have to sort of take some of the negativity out of it, like. Mm-hmm. Something that Russell Barkley once said that I really, like, to me resonated. It was like, if this thing is such a superpower and a strength, why are the insurance companies going to help pay us for treatment for it? Which I think is a really valid point, right? And I think that, like, by sugarcoating it with, nicer sounding names, like, I think it's just that. It's like, you can put a bunch of sugar on a pile of shit, but it's still a pile of shit. Right. So it's like, call it what it is. And it's like, let's deal with what it means to have a disorder. Like, why do we use that term? What does that actually mean? Right. Versus like, oh, it's so negative. It's like, well, it's not a great thing. Yeah. Right. But let's deal with that.
But this is what I think is one of the first things that people really do have to figure out. And when I say first things, it's not like, okay, you got to check this off your list before you can move on. I think we are continuously figuring this out throughout our life because your ADHD weaves itself through every aspect of your being, how you see yourself, how you relate to others, what you think you're capable of, what you take on, how you approach problems, how hard you fall when things don't go your way, how long it takes you to get back up, all those things.
How much it hurts when self-awareness is a core, like, value, and you think you're the most self-aware person, and then you discover something that you weren't aware of. And it's like, and for me, I
existential
find
crisis.
Oh my God. The older I get, and when I come across a blind spot that I now become aware of, like, it's.
I want to be blind again, please.
No, it just, it's one of these things where, like, it always hurts, but it's always worth it.
You know what? I think that is the path of continuous personal evolution. That's what I call it anyway, that as you get to know yourself better, it is a risky journey because you kind of go in blind thinking, I'm just going to go deeper. I'm going to go wider. I'm going to really learn who I am, how I am, and what that means. You're not going to find only the good stuff. It's like, you're going to find stuff that let me tell you a funny story. The very first ADHD conference in Orlando, shortly after I got diagnosed, I missed the flight. So I was a day late. And when I got there, I thought, my people, I'm going to finally be surrounded by people that are like me. I found my way into one of the lectures. I sat down. I smiled at the lady next to me, said hi. And a few minutes into the talk, she started reaching into this ginormous tote bag and scrambling around for something. And there was all this stuff in there. And there's papers crinkling and crackling. And she's pulling stuff out and throwing it all over the place. And I was losing my mind. And I thought, what the hell? And I realized, you know what? I did that shit for years. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even begin to imagine. And I just thought, wow, you're really a little touchy here. But, as we mentioned in the pre-chat, it's oftentimes the things about other people with ADHD that annoy the hell out of us that we finally go, oh my God, do I do that?
It's when the mirror is like Ooh. So close in our face that it hurts.
Indeed. But I think this whole rejection sensitivity thing, I think it's important. I think it's necessary. I think it is validating that we're talking about it because you and I are both licensed mental health professionals. Mm-hmm. And we know that because of extreme rejection sensitivity, some of us get misdiagnosed as bipolar. Some of us get misdiagnosed as borderline personality disorder because that's how dramatic it can be. But I prefer to call it rejection sensitivity for two specific reasons. One, I don't believe that any of us benefits from ladling on more diagnostic language. And at the present time, RSD is not an independent diagnosis. Rejection sensitivity also occurs on a spectrum, like all
right, like all of human condition, like yes,
like all of it is to be human. So I think you can have rejection sensitivity and have developed enough skill that it doesn't automatically lead you to tanking into dysphoria. And you can have it so severely that RSD doesn't even begin to describe it. So I just prefer to make it a little bit more general and stay away from the acronyms, which I find some people get a little too attached to, and then it becomes their whole identity.
Right.
And I am not in favor of that.
Right. And that kind of comes to the idea of like, do I have ADHD or am I ADHD? Right. Like for me, it's like
well, we could go there. Which way do you go?
I have ADHD.
See, I say I am.
That's interesting.
But that's not what we're talking about today. But I say I am only because have can imply have not. Like I have a cold. Now I don't have a cold. But I have ADHD. It's not exactly the same thing. I think it's just semantics, really.
Yeah.
But I am ADHD because it does affect every area of my life. And I see that so much more clearly now than I did in the past.
I do ADHD. I
do ADHD.
I live ADHD. I don't know. It's, as a social worker, it's like
potato.
You get sort of like ingrained with that like person first. Right. And what's really interesting, especially in the autism community, like how there's such a growing number of adults with autism that's like, it's like, stop saying person with autism, I'm autistic. And I'm like, it's just a step away from what I was taught. And I think what's most important is you call people what they want to be called.
That I totally agree with.
Right.
Yeah. And I like to be called an ADHD fueled entrepreneur.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about entrepreneurship and ADHD and then how this all sort of intersects with rejection sensitivity.
Yeah, I love it. I was a psychotherapist for many years, as you know, and became a coach about 5 years ago. And when we moved to Oregon from California, I let go of my clinical license. So now I refer to myself as a former therapist, but it obviously informs my thinking. And I think it makes me a better coach for people with ADHD, not for at least a bit, because I understand the importance of trauma. And I understand the importance of dealing with the emotions. We're not just talking about a behavioral condition and getting all the tips and tricks and hacks and stuff. What I've discovered with the female entrepreneurs I work with is that many of them are brilliant. Many of them are incredibly creative, driven, hardworking. We can manage their distractibility. We can manage their forgetfulness. We can manage their time blindness. We can manage their disorganization. But what ultimately becomes a problem is the upper limit issues and how they deal with rejection sensitivity. And for people that are not aware of upper limit issues, it's sort of like that internal thermostat of how much health, wealth, and happiness you can tolerate based on your own limiting beliefs about what you deserve. Rejection sensitivity I see coming up in not charging what they're worth, not asking to be paid, period, especially in the case of coaching, consulting, and a lot of other services, and holding back from being who they really are, all of who they really are in their content, in their branding, in their messaging, in how they appear on social media, in their podcast. It's like you can kind of tell that somebody has a whole lot more, but they're holding back. And lots of times when I poke that, it's because they are afraid of what it's going to do to them when somebody doesn't like it. I'm like, oh, this is juicy.
Yeah, I know. It was interesting this past week or so. I had a sort of a interesting situation in my alumni community where someone had a sort of a different idea about what they wanted the community to be like. And they were trying to organize some stuff. And I'm like, that's not really where I want to go with the community. And this person didn't really like it. And I was surprised at sort of how I was feeling about, someone being pretty vocal about like not liking a particular approach that I was using in my community. Right. And, so I'm like, what? I consulted with a few people and tried to kind of figure it out because I wanted to make a mindful and sensitive and smart decision for the business. And, but it was hard, like, because if I take a step back, like, it was really obvious what I should have done. Right. But it was like, but when
Talk to the person.
Well, I actually did do that, and that didn't really help because there was just it
was too far.
There was far apart. Yeah, exactly. And so that fear of like, so we're definitely going to see not on the same page. And so if I just stick to my guns, that means this person is not going to be happy. And what does that mean? And it's so funny because and I was actually talking to, I think it was my girlfriend the other day, and saying, I've done so much work on myself with that, like, worrying if someone's going to like me. And like, it's just funny, the things that we think that like, oh yeah, we've dealt with that. And like, that's behind us. And then it like pops back up. And it's like, oh God, there it is again.
I don't think any of this stuff is ever truly resolved.
Yeah.
I think as we continue to go through developmental phases as a human being, it just manifests in different ways, or we become more honest with ourselves as we get older. I think something that I've noticed for women, especially because those are my target market, is after 40s, 50s, they say, I reached a point in my life where I want to do what I want to do, whether other people like it or not. And I actually care more about what I think of me than what other people think of me. And what I'm thinking of me is that I'm holding myself back. Well, that sounds great until you actually start taking the actions to put it out there. And then the rejection sensitivity gets triggered.
Oh, and I think it goes to the upper limit stuff where it's like you learn the stuff, so you reach higher, you get higher, and then you're dealing with it all over again, rinse and repeat like forever. Right.
It's so unfair. But I think Denise Duffield-Thomas, who is a mindset coach, she uses an expression that I like: new level, new devil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kitschy, but I think what it refers to, Eric, is that we just continuously evolve. And each time we go to the next level, we have to face some of the same problems in a new way. And we get some new problems to face as well.
Mm-hmm. With that, let's take a really quick break. And when we come back, I want to just keep diving into this conversation. So we will be right back. Support for this podcast comes from ADHD reWired's coaching community. We're already in our second week of coaching groups for our spring coaching sessions. This season, we have 4 sections, 2 groups led by me, our third led by Moira Mabin, and our recently added 4th section by Roxy Martin. It's been amazing to be a part of this growing community, not just with the number of people, but with the personal growth that happens for each person who joins the ADHD reWired coaching and accountability groups. Whether you want to discover how accountability can really become your best friend, or learn strategies to gain awareness around your ADHD, or you want to step outside of your comfort zone to get started on your goals, head on over to coachingrewired.com and click on the big red button to get your name on our summer interest list. I may have mentioned last week that we might hold some early registration events to prepare for summer. So if your name is on our summer interest list, keep an eye out in your email for your invitation to join our 25th season of ADHD reWired's coaching and accountability groups. Go to coachingrewired.com to learn more about these intensive online coaching and accountability groups. That's coachingrewired.com. We are on our last steps of figuring out all the things we need to do to open Adult Study Hall. Our new Adult Study Hall community will have a dedicated room on demand where you will be able to jump in anytime, anywhere, and start crossing off items from your to-do list with other people with ADHD. Did I mention that we have 5 ongoing member-hosted Adult Study Halls, 5 days a week? That's right, you're going to be able to join Adult Study Hall or ASH hosts so you don't have to work alone. This is virtual co-working for adults with ADHD. Are you looking for more structure? Then Adult Study Hall membership also includes ASH Plus, where you can join us in guided work sessions with regular check-ins to let everyone know where you're at with your one thing that you might have been putting off, or whatever the theme we have for that particular session might be. Some days, like the day that I'm recording this ad, I am not always the adult I need, and Adult Study Hall is a place where I can have, in case I have the I don't wannas, which I'm actually in right now as I am recording this. That is where I jump in to cross off some of my own to-dos while enjoying a cup of coffee and recording a podcast ad. Are you on the founders list? If you are one of the first 100 members to join the Adult Study Hall community, then guess what? As a founder, you are going to be able to lock in your membership rate at 50% off the monthly membership cost. As long as you're an active member, your membership rate will never increase. Access to membership to Adult Study Hall is only $19.99 a month. But remember, with Adult Study Hall on demand, you are able to jump in anytime, anywhere. Whenever you might want someone there to work with you, you can go there to work together and get stuff done. Go to adultstudyhall.com and add your name to the list if you haven't already done so to get your chance at locking in our founders rate of only $9.99 a month. That is adultstudyhall.com. And while my time projections on this project opening this membership site have clearly needed to be revised multiple times, I would give an 89% confidence rate that I will be making an announcement and sending out an email by the last day of April. I'm crossing my fingers. I'm doing everything that I can, but I will promise you this. If I don't hit my end of April target to open the doors, I'm going to let you know whether it's the last day of April or someday in the beginning of May. It's coming soon. Go to adultstudyhall.com for your virtual co-working community for other adults with ADHD. That's adultstudyhall.com. All right, we are back with Diann Wingert. So right before the break, we were talking about ADHD and entrepreneurship and rejection sensitivity. When we reach new heights, when we are engaging in that process of creating, of doing that most vulnerable thing that we do, and that's to create something new that's never been done and put it out there for the world to either love it and embrace it or not, right? It's scary.
It's totally scary. And what I see is that a lot of women, I work with a lot of coaches, consultants, authors, thought leaders, people like you and I who have learned a lot through their education, through their training, through their professional experience and life experience. And they want to put that in some format to share with others, whether that's a book, a podcast, courses, group coaching, whatever that may be. But in order to be paid for what you do, people need to hear about it. They need to know about it. You need to market yourself. And some people make the distinction, Eric, between marketing and sales. They say, I have no problem marketing. I have no problem putting out content. I have no problem letting people know my message and what I stand for and how I help. But asking for the sale, will you join my program? Will you be in my mastermind? Do you want to buy this? That's where some of them get weak in the knees. And it's like, why? Well, because the marketing, you can outsource that. I mean, you can outsource the sales too, but
and there's no real personal feedback loop in that process.
Right. Right. I mean, some people don't. It's like, it reminds me of, I used to work with a lot of people in the entertainment field when I was in Los Angeles, and a lot of performers don't read their own reviews. Their handlers tell them not to, because most performers are sensitive, and knowing someone didn't like their work, some of them just go home and pull the covers over and won't come out again. So I think sometimes we can create this persona. And a lot of people create a persona online of this fabulous person who's got their shit together and all that. But you don't really have to reveal all the yucky, stuff that we'd rather hide. It was one of the reasons why you were my first ADHD coach. And I joined your program several years back, shortly after my diagnosis, because I respected that you showed both the strengths and the struggles, and now do the same. You also were the person who helped me decide to become an ADHD focused coach, because I had not made that decision until we put me on the hot seat during the group coaching in the reWired experience. But I would say,
I just have to share with you, I'm getting that whole warm feeling washing over my, I got goosebumps all over my body right now. So I just want to thank you for sharing that.
Well, I owe you a lot. And I think that, coming to the point, what you're feeling right now, that's sensitivity. What you're feeling right now is because you're sensitive. And that's a beautiful thing. A lot of my clients say, oh, I hate that I'm so sensitive. It's like, there's nothing wrong with being sensitive. Being sensitive is a gift, but it comes with vulnerability that we do need to recognize and manage. Otherwise, we will instinctively retract and recoil from every possible scenario where it might be triggered. And that is going to prevent you from ever sharing anything valuable with even a single other person. I don't want to date. Someone might reject me. I don't want to start a podcast. Nobody might listen. I don't want to write a book. Who would read it? Well, you may have noticed, as I have, that there's a lot of people putting stuff out there that isn't that good. So I'm thinking, hang on a minute. You don't even have to be that smart, that talented, that brilliant to put your work out there. What the hell? How do these people manage to do it? How do people who, frankly, in my opinion, at least, put out mediocre work, how do they do that? Either don't know they're mediocre, or they have managed to master dealing with rejection in a way that I haven't yet. So that's where we go.
So when you're working with people, is it part of it just how to help them kind of give less fucks? Or is it, or is it how do we use that sensitivity in a more positive, constructive way?
I love it. I love this question. I do both. Because, here's the thing. If I just help somebody give fewer fucks, which I'm so glad you're saying the F word, because I always have a little bit of anxiety when I'm being interviewed on someone else's podcast, because mine has an explicit rating, and lots of the interviews I do don't. And I'm like, oh, please don't let it come out. Please don't let it come out. But I'm glad we don't have to worry about that together.
I made the decision a while ago, Dan, because it was after episode 200, and I was just like,
I'm holding back.
Right. Well, I had a lot of my guests that were nervous about not being able to swear, and then I can tell they weren't in their element. And so even if there was no swears in an episode, I just put the explicit label on all of them, because I don't remember if someone sweared. So I'm just just assume they did.
I'm so glad you're saying that. I don't remember you making that change. And I was concerned about whether I should do it with the driven woman. But I thought, if I'm not going to be me, all of me, as I like to say, full strength DW, what's the point? So I sometimes swear, not because I'm trying to get attention, not because I lack a good vocabulary, because I use it like punctuation.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes nothing but a fuck will get the point across. So you asked me whether I help them deal with their sensitivity better, or whether I help them give fewer fucks. I think it needs to be a combination of both. In reality, I don't want to help another woman only give fewer fucks, because sometimes you unleash a monster that way. The goal is never not to care at all about what other people think, because when we reach that point, we have a lot in common with certain politicians who clearly don't care what other people think. And I think when you don't care at all, when you have no fucks to give, you're not any longer open to anything constructive in the way of feedback. And I never want to be that, quote, good at managing rejection sensitivity that I don't want to hear what anyone thinks. What I do want is for people to recognize, hey, if you're sensitive, you're an orchid. You're not a daisy. Orchids need special treatment in order to thrive. So protect your sensitivity. Know where you are vulnerable to having your rejection sensitivity triggered. Put things in place, and also have certain practiced routines, which I teach, for how to talk yourself down and shift your mindset around what's happening in the moment,
Like what?
so that you don't crumble. Well, I think you know that I practice meditation and mindfulness, and that I jumped out of an airplane on a recent milestone birthday because I wanted to put my own routine to the test of how do I manage fear. Ultimately, rejection sensitivity comes down to believing that if somebody doesn't like us, we're literally going to lose our mind in the moment. And it also is based on a belief that if we get rejected, that other person can reduce us to a being of no worth on the spot. I challenge that thinking. And every one of us, no matter how sensitive we are, also has resiliency and resourcefulness in us. We dig those out and we elevate them up to the surface. I'm not saying people who work with me don't have any rejection sensitivity anymore. That's not the goal. I think as long as you're sensitive, you will be sensitive to rejection. But what you make it mean that someone doesn't like you, that's where the magic is. I don't like it when people reject me. Why would I? I would love to be like, no, I wouldn't. That's too strong. Let me put it this way. I used to care a lot about whether people liked me or not.
It feels good to be liked.
Of course. It feels good to be liked. It makes life easier to be liked. But I long ago gave up any desire to be popular, because I realized, especially as a woman, to be popular means I have to fit certain cultural stereotypes that I don't ascribe to. They aren't a natural fit for my personality, and my ADHD also gets in the way.
So let me ask you this. So part of what has driven me throughout my entire business is this, I always say that if you're going to start a business, think about like, what are you either passionate about, what pisses you off, and what will people pay you for? Mm-hmm. Right?
The 3 Ps.
Yeah. And so what pisses me off is when people don't understand ADHD. Right. Mm-hmm. So that drives a lot of what I do. Mm-hmm. And I've been sort of just trying to like, kind of almost meditate on this question of what's the difference between being misunderstood and someone not understanding my perspective, which to me is I struggle with that when someone doesn't understand my perspective versus rejection sensitivity.
Okay, hold on. Let me work this through again, because I don't know. I think this is nuanced, but really important.
And I know we both like nuance.
We do. Yes. Someone not misunderstanding you. Mm-hmm. Is that when someone thinks they know how you think, but they're wrong, versus rejecting you for how you think because they don't agree with it? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like,
that's what I'm trying to figure out too.
Here's the thing, when someone misunderstands us, sometimes it's because they've chosen not to really try to wrap their mind around another way of thinking. And sometimes they just don't like us for whatever reason, and misunderstanding us makes it easier to just walk away. That's probably way too deep. You can edit it out if you want.
I mean, I'm thinking of a specific situation that I can't really share the details of, but this like when I'm trying to explain a perspective that I hold and, make my points. And then someone says, I just don't see it that way. And I'm just like, internally, I'm like, how the fuck do you not see it this way? Isn't it like so clear? Right.
Oh, okay. Now in this example, Eric,
I have a feeling I'm about to get coached right now. Okay.
Yes, you are. Okay. In this example,
yes.
Are you trying to be understood or are you trying to persuade?
A little both.
That's where your frustration comes from, because when you're trying to persuade someone, there's a foregone conclusion that the right outcome is when they agree with you. And someone may understand where you're coming from and choose not to agree with you. And that has to be okay.
But when there's a situation where, if I give my sort of points about something, and there's no like counterpoint other than we could agree to disagree. Like, how do you handle it? Almost,
you know what? Neither one of us likes a closed mind.
It almost felt like gaslighting to me in this particular scenario that I was experiencing. And I was like, wait, what? Like, or when someone says, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah. And you know what? It's kind of funny because a lot of us will say, oh, I don't have rejection sensitivity. That doesn't hold me back. When you're in business, even going into business for yourself, even making the audacious choice to say, I'm going to support myself through my own talents and efforts.
Yeah.
That's going to require that somebody values what you do enough to give you money for it. And there have to be enough of those somebodies to keep food on your table and a roof over your head. Even that, just making the choice to become an entrepreneur, that's a pretty audacious choice. You have to be able to deal with, even before you get to the marketplace, even before any potential clients, customers, or, leads can say yes or no to your programs, products, or services, you're still going to have to tell friends and family, maybe a spouse, I'm going to do my own thing. What do most people say to a first-time entrepreneur? Are you crazy? Why would you give up a good job with benefits for the instability, for the uncertainty, for the what? It's like what most people said to me when I decided to jump out of that airplane. Why would you jump out of a perfectly good plane?
Right?
And then the next thing they would say is, oh, I would never do that.
Well, then don't.
Well, yeah, exactly. Then you don't have to. Same thing with becoming self-employed. I would never do that.
I remember when I first made the decision to go into business for myself, and my ex-wife, my wife at the time, she said one thing to me where she was just kind of put in this little bit of like self-doubt, of like a reservation, and I said to her, "Here, I know that there's always going to be a time where I was going to want to start my own business. I didn't necessarily think it was going to be right now because I started my own business when I got laid off. So it was sort of a forcing function." And I said, trust me, I have enough self-doubt for the two of us. What I need for you, I'm like, what I need from you, if you have any self-doubt, go talk to your mother. I don't want to hear it. Right. And I said, like, that's how you can support me, by not sharing with me your self-doubt. Right. Cause it was like, ooh, and she did. She did honor that. So, in that way, that was very helpful.
But good on you for knowing what you needed from your spouse in order to make that transition and voicing it. That's one of the other things I deal with a lot, along with rejection sensitivity, is a lot of women really have a hard time speaking up for what they actually want and believing that it's okay to want it.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the believing it's okay if someone else doesn't want it, right?
Precisely. Well, these days I notice, like, for example, I have 3 adult kids and none of them is married. None of them has children, and they're all well into the age where those things are typical, if not the norm. And nobody's saying, oh, do you mind that we haven't gotten married yet? Or do you mind that you don't have any grandchildren yet? Because that's just not the way I raised them. I raised them to be who they are and to want what they want and to make no apology about it. But I wasn't raised that way. So it's only been in the last 5 years that I have very openly and on many occasions acknowledged I've been married 3 times. I've been in my current relationship as of tomorrow, 25 years.
Wow.
So yes,
that's amazing.
Each one got longer. First one was 5, then 15, now 25. But I was very ashamed about that. And because you're not supposed to do that. Just wrap that up with all the other, shame that ADHD wrote in on and everything else. And it's now I'm like, you know what? It is probably one of the ways I am working with my own rejection sensitivity. If you reject me because of who I am or what I've done, I got there first. Like there isn't anything you could possibly add to the shame and self-hatred that I have already done to myself.
It's interesting you say that too, because, as I'm a newly divorced person, and I found myself the other day, I was, I forget, I was either on Twitter or some other social media, and there was a thread going on about divorce, and I paused. I was like, do I want to comment on this? And which I thought was really interesting because I'm so open about so many things, and and so this idea of coming out as a divorced person, right? I don't know. It to me is one of the most courageous, brave things I ever have done. Cause I know it was the right decision. Right. And yet thinking about, well, what are people
what are people going to think?
Right. How will that affect my business?
Say?
Right. It's you know what? It's to be in an unfulfilled, unhappy marriage that despite trying, isn't going to go anywhere else. The most, cowardly thing to do is to stay there. In my opinion.
I totally agree. In fact, when I got divorced, the second time, I was rejected by my entire community. We were part of a church community, and I literally got hate letters, the kind where people cut them out of magazines and glue them on. I was like, creepy. You got to be kidding me. This is like in a bad movie. I had to move. I had to move to another community because it was really that bad, because I was the one that initiated it. And this notion was, and someone actually said this to me, Eric, your marriage is no worse than the rest of ours. What makes you so special that you think you deserve better?
That is so sad.
So sad. I'm like, I can only be responsible for my own life. I have nothing to say to you about yours.
So for this whole community, they're all suffering in these awful marriages, so you should too.
They were literally like, how dare you? And I realized, wow, it didn't occur to me till that moment, but actually allowing yourself to acknowledge that you want what you want and that it's okay for you to want it and it's okay for you to live your life according to what you want is such an affront to so many people. Even if you don't think you have rejection sensitivity or RSD or whatever you want to call it, you have to confront that on some level, because I don't even think people realize how much we hold ourselves back, wanting to fit in, wanting to belong, wanting to be liked, even if it just means not ruffling anybody's feathers or rocking the boat. Sometimes it takes something like a divorce before you realize, I'm going to take this on because I just can't hold my breath anymore.
With that, let's take a deep breath and take a break. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our patrons. Whether you are a long-time listener or if you've recently been introduced to the podcast, welcome. One way listeners will show their support is by becoming a patron. So what does it mean to become a patron, and what kind of benefits do you get as a patron? Well, if you are looking for ad-free episodes, you can join us starting at the $5 a month level, where you will gain access to a separate patron-only member RSS feed, so you can enjoy ADHD Rewired ad-free. Members contributing at the $10 a month level will have access to the audio replays of our monthly group coaching calls for our patrons, our ad-free episodes, and more. Patron members who contribute at the $25 a month level will have access to the monthly coaching audio replays, ad-free episodes, and can join me for our group coaching call for patrons every fourth Tuesday of the month. If you are listening to this episode on the day it came out, that means our next group coaching call is next Tuesday, April 27th at 3 p.m. Central. That's Tuesday, April 27th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. If you're a patron at the $25 a month level and you want to join us next week, would it be helpful to hit pause, maybe to write this down on your calendar so you can join me and other patrons next week for our group coaching call? If yes, go ahead and do it right now. I'll still be right here when you get back. It would be great to see you next week. And if you are supporting us at a lower amount and you want to upgrade your membership on Patreon, go ahead and do that so you can join us next week. Now, if you still want to show your support, but you aren't in a position to contribute financially, not a problem. Another great way to show your support is to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so, or leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast app you use to listen to this podcast on. To learn more, to become a patron, go to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Or just click the Patreon tab at the top of our page. That's ADHDrewired.com. And thanks. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, I want to welcome you. I also want to let you know that ADHD Rewired is a podcast network. We have 4 other podcasts, including Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan, ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens, and our newest addition to the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network is the ADHD-friendly lifestyle with Moira Mabin. Go to ADHDrewired.com. When you click on podcasts, it'll drop down and say ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can see all of our podcasts right there. Go subscribe. There's something for everyone. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in every week. And now you can get ADHD Rewired podcasts 5 days a week. There is a little something for everyone. Go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network. That's ADHDrewired.com/podcast network. All right, we are back. One other topic that I think kind of integrates all of our conversation so far is this idea of embracing extreme ownership.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you?
Whew. I think it took me a lot of years to realize how much I was limiting myself. It started with being an adopted kid and in an abusive family, and recognizing I was different from other kids, but not understanding why for a lot of years. And I think for me, learning early on, you're different, and that's not a good thing. It started a very long journey of holding back and what I would call it passing for normal and conforming to the norm, which over decades, Eric, came to feel like I was living on the inside of a trash compactor with no way out. And I think when I chose to get divorced at the age of 40, I didn't quite know how much rejection and judgment I was inviting into my life, but I knew that things were going to change on every level. And I think that was really the beginning. And it was many years later, after such a long time of questioning whether I have ADHD or not, whether I am ADHD or not, I finally went and officially got the diagnosis just 5 years ago from a child psychiatrist. It was a continuous process, like we've been talking about, a continuous process of getting to know myself better, coming to understand myself better, deciding to accept myself more and more, and then sharing more and more of who I truly am with others, and risking what that was going to mean. And what I have discovered maybe sounds a little cliche, is that I think it can be encapsulated in one of my favorite t-shirts that I have worn so many times. It's just shredded now. It's got a silhouette of a woman, and the words over her profile say, "I'm too much for some people. They're not my people." And it's realizing that, yes, I am bold and brilliant and a badass, but I'm also sometimes feeling broken and sad and very lonely. And while you may see the things that I do ridiculously well and assume that's how all of my life looks, it is simply not so. And I'm finally at a point where I can say, it's all okay. I apologize for none of it. And to the best of my ability, I want to lead other people who are still struggling with making that decision to do so. I call it extreme ownership. I call it radical self-acceptance. I am not saying, hey, I'm ADHD, deal with it. It's that I understand that I can be complicated. I can be confusing. I can be paradoxical. And I'm willing to take responsibility for how that affects other people's lives without trying to make it okay with them that I am who I am.
When you refer to extreme ownership, are you I know there's that book by the guy who I can't remember his name.
Me neither.
But that guy who wrote the book Extreme Ownership.
That one.
I listened to that book about a year or so ago, and the whole idea of it wasn't he was in the Army or Marines or
yes.
And the idea of extreme ownership is like there could be something like that bad happened, and 99% of it was like really genuinely not your fault. It's imperative to find the 1% that you were responsible for and fully own that, because there's a way, because you can learn from that. And I just think that is so important. So whenever whether it's as a parent and I hear my son say it's not my fault, or not owning it, or when I'm doing my coaching groups, it's like helping people find the lesson. It doesn't matter what the outcome was. Like, it doesn't matter that there were all these other circumstances that sure were outside of your control. Like, there are things you could learn from any situation that we can own, so we can learn from it.
I was first exposed to what eventually led to my understanding extreme ownership. I worked in a children's hospital, Los Angeles, for about 10 years. And one of the friends I had there was the risk analysis person. Anytime there was any sort of a negative event in the hospital, somebody got the wrong medication, anything went wrong, there was a negative outcome, an adverse event. There was always this process of root cause analysis. And all of the players would come to the table, and there was a lot of conversation, a lot of research, a lot of data sharing. But ultimately, if there was any chance the hospital was going to get sued, we had to determine all the possibilities for contribution. We did not use the word fault. Contribution. All of the choices, all of the actions, all of the behaviors that could have led to that result, and then sort of parse them out. Because, if you've ever been sued for malpractice, they determine what degree of fault was the patient, what degree was the surgeon, what degree was the anesthesiologist, and so forth. So I had some awareness of that. And where I have used it in my own life the most is with my 3 adult children, because I made the decision to get my second divorce when they were 10, 12, and 15. And, back then, the notion was, even in the mental health community, which I was a part of, the notion was that kids will be disrupted in the first year. And if you get them into therapy and, tell them it's not their fault and all these things, and they get through the first year, okay, you're kind of home free. I'm overstating it. There was later a book, which I can't remember the name of right now, but interviewed children of divorce over many, many years, 5 years later, 10 years later, and so forth. It is only in the last few years that I can fully appreciate the impact of that decision, good and bad, on each of my children. So I think for the first 10 years, Eric, I continued to feel like anything in their life that wasn't great was a direct result of my decision to, quote, break up the family. And I didn't even realize that's what I was thinking. It was sort of this like continuous reel rolling in the back of my head. Like, oh, my kid is experimenting with drugs. Oh, it must be because I broke up the family. Oh, my son can't find happiness in a relationship. Oh, it must be because I broke up the family. And I didn't even realize I was thinking that until one day I was talking with my oldest son and I just casually mentioned that. I don't remember when that happened. I think it must have been around the time I broke up the family. I seriously didn't even realize what I was saying, like Freudian slip. And he literally gave me this stern but loving look and said, Mom, you didn't break up the family. You just rearranged it. Mm. We're all still here. We're not broken. You need to let this go. And
what a gift.
Oh, such a gift. And it's years later and I get just as choked up as I did then. But that was permission for me to really take ownership of the fact that there are also positive effects that my kids have experienced as a result of the end of that marriage. And there's only so much I'm actually responsible for. So I think it put things in their proper place. I don't have to live the rest of my life feeling guilty and in unforgiveness with myself, but I fully own my part. And we have conversations quite openly with each of them about how that choice has impacted them in various ways. I don't feel guilt anymore. I don't feel shame anymore. I have fully forgiven myself. I don't feel the need to fix them or change their mind or make it okay. And I cannot tell you what a relief that is.
Yeah, obviously, as still being sort of new into the world of divorce, it's that's always on my mind. So,
well, I can be your mentor. You can tap into me as a resource because I certainly have some tread on these tires.
Thanks to our friend the Google, the author of the book Extreme Ownership is Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. It's Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. Yeah, and I listened to an audio. I think I remember the I think the reader is Jocko, and it's got this very gruff kind of voice, kind of like that. Yeah, so it's like
just want to stand up and salute, right?
Right. So if that's not your thing, then but yeah, it's I think anytime we are doing whatever the hard thing is, like we gotta lean into it and know that like we gotta sort of know who we are and what we're bringing in to that experience, because that is the thing that can thrive. That is the thing that can be hurt. That is the thing that can do both. Right. And so I think it is, if you have something that you feel will truly genuinely make somebody's life better, whether it's through you're offering growth or just a novelty experience of maybe art, right? Like go out and give it to the world, sell it. You are worth it. Stop giving your stuff away for free. You are worth it.
Yes. And as you always like to remind us, we can do hard things.
And as one of our alumni added to that component a couple of seasons ago, but we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible.
Oh, God, I wish somebody had told me that when I first started on my own.
Yes, that was one of those moments where like the student becomes the teacher. And it was just like, yes, that was the thing I most needed to hear in that moment.
If I had it to do over, I've been self-employed for the last decade. I would get started quicker. You don't need nearly as much thinking and planning and preparation as you think. It's kind of funny when I look back over my life because I was so impulsive early on, and then it shifted all the way over to way overthinking and overcomplicating things. So it's like, I wish I had a little bit more of that impulsivity back because, I made some mistakes, but I also made some brilliant moves too, just jumping in.
Her podcast is The Driven Woman. Her website, DiannWingertCoaching.com. We'll put links to all that in the show notes, which will be at ADHDrewired.com/whatever episode number this is. Just put that episode number right after the slash and you will find Diann. Diann, this was, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and for talking with us.
Thank you for the stimulating conversation, for the opportunity to reconnect, and also some genuine, heartfelt moments. That means a lot to me.
Thank you. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHDrewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, ADHDrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You know, you might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus yet, check out Brene Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers. reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.